Thank you, Jeff, for those kind words, and good morning, conference. Bore da gynhadledd. Fel ASA Cydwadol dros Gymru, mae'n fraint eich croesawu chi I gyd o ledled y Dinas Unedig I Brifddinas Cymru. As the Conservative MEP for Wales, I am delighted to welcome you all from across the UK to our capital, Cardiff. Dwi ddim yn teimlo'n hir iawn ers I fi fod yn sefyll ar y llwyfan fan hyn yn anerch y cynhadledd yn dilyn ein llwyddiant yn y etholiadau Ewropeaidd, etholiad lle daeth y Cydwadwyr Cymreig yn gyntaf yng Nghymru y tro cyntaf o fewn cof. It doesn't seem so long ago that I stood on this stage addressing conference following our success in the European elections, an election where the Conservatives topped the polls in Wales for the first time in living memory. The months following my election seem to have flown by, and the learning curve has been a steep one, as our political party and group in Europe have tasked me with leading the legislative work on economic issues. At a critical time in the aftermath of the worst financial crisis, this is a huge challenge, and one in which I hope my background in finance is helping me to meet. Love it or loathe it, the EU is currently extremely busy on a future legislative programme, which will affect us here in Wales and across the UK. However, the only way to ensure that the directives and regulations are delivered to the relevant government for implementation in a suitable form is to engage in the process throughout. This is what we within the ECR are striving to do. And despite the media silence on many of these critically important matters, it is what we are succeeding in doing across the different policy areas. Whether it's on financial derivatives, fish discards, or on cross-border healthcare directives, or even negotiating the size of the EU budget itself, the UK Conservative MEPs are seeking to deliver for you, our constituents. However, it is our economy here in the UK that I wish to talk to conference today about, hopefully demonstrating the folly of the Welsh First Minister, who last week described the 2% drop in Wales's GDP announced by the EU Statistical Office as a legacy of the 1980s. I fail to see how this period in our history has anything to do with the GDP 3 decades later. For comparison, a similar population in previously communist Slovenia managed between 1998 and 2008 to improve their GDP from just under 70% of the EU average to greater than 90% of the EU average, whilst during the same period, Wales remains below the 75% average. This despite Wales being a recipient of some £3 billion of additional EU money in the last 10 years. This simply cannot be right. Wales, more than most regions of the UK, has a huge vested interest in the EU budget. The current budget has 2 items which account for some 40 and 46% of the overall EU spend, namely CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, and the Convergence and Competitiveness Funds. Wales is in receipt of large amounts of EU convergence funds. As to our shame, we qualified for a second round of top-level funding, as well as a smaller amount of competitiveness funding, and of course our rural communities are very much reliant on an effective CAP, which recognises the unique aspects of farming in Wales. Whilst within various parts of the EU, China and India, to name a few of the world's areas, there is a lot of enthusiasm and energy going into forward-looking projects and funding strategies. The buzzwords we're hearing are research and development, innovation, and competition in a global market. In contrast, it seems that here in Wales, the focus is backward-looking, particularly when it comes to the needs and use of EU funds. All the Welsh Assembly Government seems to be focused on are the funds it receives for being one of the worst performing areas of the EU. Carwyn Jones welcomed economic statistics that showed how badly Wales was doing, as it apparently gave them more scope to argue for more EU money. A recent question posed by the Western Mail: would qualifying for more EU funds be a national disgrace? Is simply answered by yes. When Wales has been let down by an Assembly government who have failed to use the funds effectively, failed to raise our economy to that of the average of an enlarged EU, and they have failed the people of Wales, they really should be ashamed of that record. In an age of ballooning public deficits, when the previous government maxed out the national credit card, WAG cannot expect to continue spreading a tale of industrial degeneration and urban poverty from the 1980s and expect handouts that can then be squandered on non-wealth creating projects. Beneficial social projects, perhaps, but certainly not regenerating the Welsh economy. The Financial Crisis Committee in the Parliament has been looking at measures required within the EU to stimulate future growth. These have featured access to venture capital, flexible use of cohesion funding for infrastructure projects, leveraging the European Investment Bank's expertise in financing large projects, and taking measures to help differentiate regions' competitiveness. Wales currently has all of these remedies at hand. We have, through Finance Wales, got access already to venture capital funds for our business community. Though you try finding any Welsh companies who are recipients of these investment funds. Our Welsh businesses constantly complain about being excluded from convergence funding pots, and dishearteningly, the WAG has failed to utilise the EIB activities to fund infrastructure projects across Wales. Given the precarious state of the Welsh economy, I sincerely hope that when the EU budget is renegotiated over the coming years, that those projects which are valuable do not end up without funding. However, there are many other positively focused parts of the EU strategy for growth that are not handouts, but specifically aimed at new industries, research and innovation. Yet the WAG has proven itself woefully inadequate in assisting our innovative companies here in Wales in securing these funds. The 7th Framework for Research and Technological Development is one of these programmes. You may wonder about the 6 earlier programmes. In the 6th Framework, Wales managed to get 2.6% of all the money allocated to the UK of these funds, some 26 million euros, out of the 1.35 billion euros awarded to the UK as a whole. Framework 7 is aimed at places like Wales. Large companies can access up to 50% of the money used for a research project from the EU in this way. This number rises to 75% for small and medium-sized enterprises. And given that 98% of Welsh businesses are classed as these SMEs, this could be a huge bonus, allowing them to invest in new technologies, develop new products, as well as fostering partnerships across the EU, allowing expansion into these markets. Wales' 200,000 small and medium-sized enterprises contribute over £40 billion in turnover to the Welsh economy and employ over 600,000 people in Wales. Yet where is the help for them? The one thing that unites MEPs across all the European political parties is helping SMEs. It's a piece of EU jargon that's actually working its way from soundbite to action in the form of the Small Business Act. Whereas the EU, with our prompting, is focused on cutting red tape and supporting SMEs, the WAG is clearly lagging. Under a recent review of public procurement rules, the European Commission proposed reforms so that smaller businesses can access more public contracts. The WAG needs to immediately reform its procurement procedures in order to ensure access to its £4.6 billion procurement budget for Welsh SMEs. This would immediately help foster vitality directly in these hard economic times. The Conservatives in the European Parliament have made it their priority to stop damaging legislation and to promote positive measures to help SMEs that are the backbone of our economy. They provide jobs and training to generations of Welsh families, and they need our support. I can only hope that companies, large and small in Wales, will continue to engage with the EU and work to ensure that EU funds are used responsibly to innovate and develop new ways to allow Wales to compete at the forefront of the EU's attempts to stimulate growth. Wales has a wealth of talented businessmen and women whose ideas need to be harnessed and encouraged without burdening them with any additional regulation. SMEs hold the key to economic regeneration here in Wales, but indeed in the whole of the UK and across the whole of the EU. And I will continue to work with my Conservative colleagues to ensure that the European Commission fully understands what they require. Wales can have a strong future, but I truly believe that only the Welsh Conservatives here can deliver these ambitions. Ewch amdani. Diolch yn fawr.